Welcome to On Top of PR with Jason Mudd, presented by Review Maxer.
Hello and welcome to On Top of PR. I'm your host, Jason Mudd with Axia Public Relations, and today I'm joined by an Axia guest, Bob Wiltfong. Bob, welcome to the show. We're glad you're here.
Hey, thank you, Jason. Good to be here.
Bob works at Axia Public Relations as an account director. He is working with our PR clients at the agency and with an emphasis on news strategy and earned media through media relations. Mm-hmm. And Bob comes to our agency with quite a unique background. Bob, you started out in television news. You went to the University of Kansas. I went to the University of Missouri. So, of course, there's zero rivalry there between the border war.
That's why we have to be in two different locations.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And then, Bob, you also did some entertainment, both working in television and in movies, which I'm, really thrilled about. That's very cool. And so here today, we're going to talk a little bit about, obviously, a lot about PR and media relations and that kind of thing. But we're going to talk about PR tips from a former TV news reporter and, to your credit, also an anchor. So, Bob, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm excited about sharing what I've learned.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay. So first of all, one of the things we were talking about as we were getting mic'd up and everything was, maybe one thing that has surprised you about the PR profession has been rejection. Talk to me about rejection, Bob.
Yeah, it's not uncommon for a PR person to deal with a lot of rejection, right? And when you're first starting off in the business, it's hard not to take it personally. Mm-hmm. That's something I went through in TV news. Every day with deadline pressure, you had to constantly ask people for interviews. And, 50% of the time, if you were lucky, they said no. So it's kind of beat into you on a local deadline TV news reporter that's part of the job. Coming into PR, it is part of the job as well. And I've learned some things through my news experience that I hold with me in PR, and maybe they're helpful for you in dealing with rejection. And the tips that come to mind are that assuming good intentions, best intentions with people until proven otherwise. So a lot of times we send out emails, we call, we don't get returned, love or response. And it's easy to think it's me, it's my pitches, it's, all this stuff. And the reality is some of these reporters are busy or you're not hitting the right tone with them. And they're doing their deadlines and they're reporting. So don't take it personally if it takes a while for somebody to respond or not at all. There could be a variety of reasons. And think of your own life. I mean, there's a variety of reasons why you're slow to return somebody's LinkedIn message, for example. I also think to frame what you're doing as a PR person, it's helpful to frame it as all you need is really one yes. That's all you're looking for is one yes. And you're in a sea of no's, basically.
Right.
So you're just swimming through no's to get to that one yes, and you will find that one yes. You just got to keep swimming.
That's good, Bob. I like that. When I think about, PR, I tell people sometimes that the first 50 rejections are the hardest.
Yeah. Right.
So once you get past having people say no 50 times, then it's just kind of rolls off your back. And the other cliche I like to say is a quick no is better than a forever maybe. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And so sometimes you kind of get stringed along and nothing ever happens. But at the same time, we celebrated Axia, as the power of follow-ups and following up with. And, I think it's important we just take a pause here for just a second and say, when people think of PR, they almost always think of media relations. And while media relations plays an important role in PR is about relationships with external audiences, right? And that might include customers, clients, employees, but also could involve constituents and the citizens that live around your company or your industry peers, or maybe even government regulators. So I think when we think about PR, we shouldn't always think about media relations. And so to that end, when I say the first 50 rejections are the hardest, or that a quick no is better than a forever maybe. I can think of times where, we followed up and a journalist finally said yes, or a stakeholder finally said yes, or an influencer finally said yes, or a politician, or whatever it might be, right? So while at our agency, we don't focus on a lot of political work, you still need to make sure you've got a good reputation politically and otherwise.
Yeah. And I think of acting. You mentioned my background in acting. Boy, that's another profession. Talk about no's. That's a series of no after no after no. There's a joke about acting that it's largely unemployment interrupted by work. That's how many no's there are in that business. Right. And you're absolutely right. I love it that a quick no is better than a forever maybe. Absolutely spot on. And ghosting somebody, it doesn't feel good to be ghosted. I'd rather have somebody say no, and here's why even, than ghost me. But that happens. That's especially in today's world, that happens. You just can't take it personally.
I know a salesperson who's very good at what they do, and they told me sometimes you just have to change things up. If you're getting ghosted, try to approach them from a different channel. So if you've been emailing them, maybe email's just not a good way to get them, or maybe you're lost in their inbox. Maybe you're going to spam. So, pick up the phone, send them a text message, send them a DM through social media, connect with them on LinkedIn. Maybe try to, visit them in person, send them a handwritten note. This sounds funny, but, a lot of companies, ours, not that I know, we don't have a fax machine anymore. I wouldn't know how to send a fax anymore. But if I really needed to get a hold of somebody and break through the clutter, maybe I could send them a fax. That would be so unusual. It's kind of like sending them a telegram or an old fashioned letter, and so I'm always telling people that just because something is very dated or seems like something you wouldn't use doesn't mean that's a way to stand out from everybody else.
Exactly. And, one of the most common complaints that are, voiced against PR people from journalists is they don't even read my content. They don't even know. And I get it. On one hand, as a former reporter, I totally get it. You're like, this person is clearly just cutting and pasting to me as a reporter. They don't know what I'm doing, really. And it's just kind of like, why should I care? We know as PR people that we have not only that outlet, we have like 50, other outlets we're trying to keep on top of. So it's almost impossible, right, to consume all this media. And one of the practices that's very helpful for me that was turned on to me by Michael Smart, who's widely considered one of the gurus of, good practices in PR, is this idea of read and react. And so he prescribes, and I have adopted it, that instead of trying to, please the journalists and consume everybody, all you're trying to do is consume your top focused targets. And every day, make a point of consuming maybe one or two of their content pieces, and then contact them or reach out to them with no pitch, but just to acknowledge, hey, I saw that report you did at 10 o'clock. I thought it was great. It could be as simple as that. Or you listen to a podcast and you say, I thought that was fantastic. It brought to mind a different question for me. What are your thoughts on that? Or it just intrigued me and I want to share it with other people. It's just another way to build a relationship. You're getting your name out in front of them again, and you're killing that complaint of like, boy, they don't even know my content.
Yeah.
I like that.
One thing you're reminding me of, Bob, is that, PR people can't be PR people if they're not spending time consuming content, right? You can't pitch something that you've never seen. But more importantly, we've got to be able to watch the news and apply the trends and what we're seeing in coverage back to the things that we're pitching. And so, I don't know a single PR person who's really good at what they do who does not consume news. Now, I believe in taking news fast, and getting away from the news for a little while. But I think by watching the news, you can sharpen your skills and you can find, a little bit more of, topics that are related and see what the media is talking about.
I agree. And one of the things I've done to try to do that quickly is Google News alerts. So every day at the beginning of my day in my inbox, I have 4 news alerts based on my client's main interest. And that has been helpful. I find newsjacking opportunities at the very least. And there was a great, when I talk about, building relationships for the long term with reporters, sometimes I got a benefit out of that because there was a reporter in a big market, a TV reporter that, I built a relationship with, fortunately, and had a good rapport with. And in my Google News alert came a story that did not involve my client, but was in the topic that they were involved in.
Right.
And most of the time I just ignore it. Doesn't involve my client. I'm not going to bother. But then I was thinking, I think this is a really good story for that reporter that I know. And I just sent along to that reporter and said, this has nothing to do with my client, but I think it's a really good story. Mm-hmm. And hopefully it's of use to you. And that reporter immediately emailed me back, all excited about the news angle I'd given them. And I think that's going to be fruitful down the line.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm glad to hear you mention that because I think it is all about paying it forward. Yeah. And, over the years, I've had clients who have most definitely, benefited from participating in news and being a trusted resource and paying it forward. And so it's been conversations like, we have several publicly traded clients, and a cub reporter may be on a beat covering publicly traded companies for the first time. And so for my client to be willing to kind of walk them through the ins and outs of a publicly traded company, what different reports mean, what different things mean, then they become a trusted resource to that reporter when they're covering our client's publicly traded company and other publicly traded companies. And they won't forget the kindness that you showed them and the generosity you gave to them during that period of time, which I think is a really good approach. Clients who I see aren't successful with media is those that just like, hey, I can't spend time with a journalist unless they're going to cover me. And that's just the wrong approach, right? You're not investing the relationship the right way.
Yeah, totally. And, one flip side thing of that I've learned in doing PR is we are so fixated on trying to get mentions for our clients sometimes that we forget that putting them into a newsjack or a pitch may not really be the right connection. It may be a stretch, in other words.
Yeah.
I had one pitch that was about relieving mental stress on the job. And I had a client that was a software provider. And I polished this pitch where it was like I was connecting using software with improving mental health on the job. Mm-hmm. And I give it to my peers, and the peers say it's a great pitch, but is it really a match? Mm-hmm. And are you hurting your credibility by pitching something that's clearly a stretch?
Yeah.
And I thought it was a good note. I was like, I have to put that off to the side because I think they're right. I think it was a stretch.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because what we're talking about is forcing a pitch or forcing a client or an angle into a story that's just plain not newsworthy. And that'll lead into how to build, relationships. But before we do that, I do want to let us take a quick break. We're going to come back on the other side. We're going to talk about what is newsjacking, because I don't want to make any assumptions that our audience knows what that is. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to talk about how to build relationships, how to leverage local news on behalf of your brand, and a couple other things about, kind of talking here with Bob about PR tips from a former television news reporter. So hang with us. We'll be right back after this break.
You're listening to On Top of PR with your host, Jason Mudd. Jason is a trusted advisor to some of America's most admired and fastest growing brands. He is the managing partner at Axia Public Relations, a PR agency that guides news, social, and web strategies for national companies. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to On Top of PR. I'm Jason Mudd with Axia Public Relations, and joining me is our guest, Bob Wiltfong, who is also with Axia Public Relations. And we've been talking about media relations, earning media coverage on behalf of clients and companies. And hopefully you're learning some good tips from our time together. And if so, please take a minute to share this episode with a colleague or friend who you think would benefit. Bob, we're talking about newsjacking, and it's funny because people have either heard that term or haven't, and either way, I feel like you can read people's body language when you bring it up, and they usually light up either with curiosity or enthusiasm. So tell me, or tell our audience, what's newsjacking?
Newsjacking is looking at the news of the day, a headline, and hijacking it, if you will, to what your client is about. So, and keeping it newsworthy at the same time. So say there's a recall of some, grocery item, and you have a client that is all about, food safety. That would be an example of taking that news headline and saying, Purdue Farms recalls, chickens and this, blah, blah, blah. And our expert from our company can speak to how important that is and why, what we did well in spotting that and what they could do better for the next food recall. That would be an example of newsjacking.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. And so to take your point earlier, maybe there's a trending news or topical news about, stress levels on the job, at work or whatever. And if it tied into, I think you described a construct tech client earlier, if you could tie that into, a construction publication talking about stress in the workplace and how construction technology can alleviate that, then you've kind of got the table set for you as opposed to just kind of coming in randomly about it. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that 100%. An example of construct tech that fits with today's kind of headlines as we record this, there was within the last month, there was a headline out of the news world that the FBI was suggesting that nobody use public outlets for charging their phones. So plugging in at an airport charger, and they said you can get hacked. And I happen to represent a construct tech client at that time. So I made sure, I was like, do you have any issues with this? Or when people plug in to use your software, is that an issue? And they didn't. But boy, I was like, I'm going to jump all over that thing because I've got a client that could fit this to a T and be used a lot.
Well, and that's kind of the enterprise thinking, I think, that we have to bring to our clients and, kind of thinking about them, whether it's subconsciously or consciously all the time, consuming news on an ongoing basis and just looking for those opportunities to either newsjack or integrate or ride the coattails of something that's already going on, or just saying, if you're covering X, have you thought about Y?
Yeah.
One rookie mistake I see a lot of PR people make is they see a journalist that's covered X and they're like, hey, when you cover X, I think you should cover X again, and this time include my company, right? Yeah. And it's like, that's almost like a slap in the face. It's almost like going to an author of a book and say, hey, your book's pretty good, but when you rewrite it, you might want to change some stuff in chapter 7,
right.
Yeah,
and
they're like, oh, okay, great. And who are you? What are you doing telling me how to do my job? So anyway, so I see that mistake a lot. So if a journalist covered a topic already, they're probably not going to cover that topic again the next day, and certainly not because you said, "Gosh, you left out my company. I think you should rewrite, write another story about it." It's almost like sending them to detention or something.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's a great point. You've always got to forward the idea somehow, or
that's right,
a related angle. For sure. And, speaking of news, I think of, when you talk about real estate, we talk about location.
Yep.
With news, it's local. So I think anytime, an example, if you have a nationwide client that has a lot of markets, rather than putting out one pitch that fits the whole nation, I like to think of those individualized markets. And how can I speak, if I'm talking to Detroit and Omaha and San Francisco, how can I make my news releases for those markets specific to them? So I can use their name in the release rather than just nationwide. Yeah. I can, if they're a franchise, I can connect their franchise owner with that news release for that market. Those are examples of localizing. Wherever you can, localize.
Yeah, all news is local is the cliche in a newsroom. And, I get, years ago, we had a client who NBC News did a story on them and then pushed it out to all 250 ABC News local affiliate stations across America. Guess which one was seen by more people? It was the micro, local news shows that had a collective audience greater than the national one had. The national one, of course, reached millions of people instantly, right? But the smaller ones hit, 250 markets all at one time, which, delivers a different type of audience. Yeah. I tell people all the time, and I'm sure you've heard me talk about this, Bob, but there's a scenario where we have a client who's looking for national media coverage, and they say all we want is national media. But they're most newsworthy in their own industry and most newsworthy in their own hometown where they have locations, and especially where they're headquartered. Mm-hmm. And every single time we get them coverage, say in the Wall Street Journal or New York Times, it's a big deal to them. They're excited about it. But where they really get excited is when they're in their hometown newspaper, where their friends, family, neighbors, and golf buddies or whatever see her in the paper and they make comments about it, right? And so they tell me all the time, hey, I couldn't believe how many people saw that I was in, the local daily newspaper where I live, or the local lifestyle magazine, or whatever it might be. And what I found is interesting, or what's a good reminder to that is, even when the client says 100%, I only want to focus on national media, in my mind, I know we have to earmark a certain percentage of that time towards local news, because all news is local, and that's where you're going to get the most coverage. And early in my career, I was working with a publicly traded national company, or actually global company, but we kept getting the most media coverage about them in their hometown. And I was, kind of frustrated with it, because I was trying to spread it out a little bit more. But the truth is, you're never going to be more newsworthy than where you are based, where you have the most employees, where you have the most economic influence, and other activities happening. So
think of your audience, the impact of, if you watch the national news, maybe you see a shooting, on the national news, just an example, and you consume that touches you, and then a week later you kind of forget about it, right? But if a shooting happens in your own neighborhood, you'll talk about that for the rest of your life. And I think it's the same way with news. If you can get the local franchise owner in Cincinnati talking to you, as opposed to the national rep on national news, that Cincinnati thing is going to really impact that Cincinnati audience a lot more.
Yeah. Again, all news is local. We talk about, there's a ballpark about 10 elements of news, and maybe those could be categorized into, 3 primary topics of, local, timeliness, and oddity, right?
Yes, that's what I was taught in J school. You mentioned, our background at the beginning of the recording here, that you're U of Mizzou alum, which is an outstanding journalism school. I happen to go to the little brother, which is KU, as far as journalism, and that's what I was taught. Those 3
elements. The redheaded stepchild, actually.
Well, not in basketball, but I mean, everything else. Sure, I'll give it to you. The 3 elements I was taught in J school, I think, are very true even today, is what you exactly mentioned. Is it timely? Is it local? And is it out of the ordinary? Yeah. And, if it's out of the ordinary, boy, you've got a good pitch. You've got a good chance of getting the attention of a journalist.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a superlative, the first time this has ever happened, or the biggest this, or whatever, or or it's got proximity, or being nearby, like you talk about local, I think that makes a lot of sense. So, to that end, we'll put in the episode notes a mention of the elements of news. We'll also link to another episode we've done in the past where we've interviewed somebody who's, where the focus was specifically, what's it like to go from being in journalism to working in PR. Maybe one day we'll find somebody who can talk about what it was like going from PR to working in journalism. But
I don't hear that nearly as much as I hear the other.
Yeah. So I don't know if I can think of a guest, but if our audience knows of a guest, we'd love to hear about that. So please let us know. The other thing I thought we would just mention while we're together is, one of my pet peeves when I'm pitching a newsroom is I'll go to a newsroom and I will say to them, hey, I've got this story. I think it's interesting. Who can I email it to? And they almost always will come back and go, oh yeah, just send it to news@newsroomname.com. Yeah. And, that's actually one of my pet peeves. And I wanted to talk about that for just a minute here. The reason it's my pet peeve is because I'm a big believer that if an email goes to everybody, then it really goes to nobody, because nobody's really going to take ownership in it. Everyone's going to kind of assume, okay, well, a dozen or 2 other people saw this as well. One of them is going to be more interested in me and probably end up doing it, right?
Yeah.
And what I found in my experience is I will actually tell the person that's giving me that address, say, I'm not going to send an email and blast the entire newsroom for people who are currently have a day off or on another assignment or aren't on shift yet. I want to send it to an assignment desk. I want to send it to a producer. I want to send it to a decision maker who can say, this is a great story for Ken. This is a great story for Mary, Maria, Stephen, whatever it might be. And then they're actually assigning it to them, or at least offering it to them as a news story. Bob, do you think that is a good practice?
Oh, absolutely. I'm doing a lot of nodding my head to the fact I might pull a muscle in my neck. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think that is one of the things that is, I think early on, a lot of PR professionals do that they're just happy to get the contact and they're like, oh, I can hit the whole newsroom. That's great. And I think we overthink this sometimes. And a good question I think to ask ourselves as PR people is, how do I handle this? How would I get noticed, or how would somebody really impact me if they were pitching me? Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely right. If you send to an email that is for your PR company, it goes to the inbox and maybe you never see it. But if it has your name and it's specifically to somebody who works at that PR company, you got it. You got the attention of that person. And I think with pitches, just being authentic, being real with people. You don't have to be anything more than what you are. And just respect it. They're busy, you're busy, and pitch accordingly. But pitch to as specific a person as you can is absolutely spot on, Jason. Yeah.
Yeah, whenever I'm writing anything, any kind of communication, I always try to picture a real person that I know. That's a real persona that I'm writing this for. So I might think of, Sarah or Beth or Robert or whoever it is. The more clarity I have on writing it, even though I might be sending this to multiple recipients, mm-hmm. I really think of one person, and it just helps me kind of visualize, how would they react to this? What would they expect? What are their questions and concerns? What tone should I take? And it really, creates quite a bit of clarity. And I would say that's one thing I would really recommend to PR people, is that they slow down and they really take their time and think of it as like, I don't want to say a love letter, but maybe a custom letter or custom communication to just one person. I'd rather see somebody, and again, we always talk about pitching media, but PR is so much more than that. But I'd rather see us think about writing one really good custom pitch directly to one person and do that 5 times than to send out 50 or 100 or 500 emails hoping somebody buys or takes the bait kind of thing. And again, I think that goes back to what we talked about earlier, the importance of relationships.
Yeah. And one of the things we have as in our arsenal as PR people is that journalists and outlets are an open book for their staff. If you look at any local TV station, they almost always have a meet the news team directory. And page, so I like to go in there. I like to look at the person. I like to read their bio. Mm-hmm. And to your point, then I'm writing specifically to somebody. It isn't just a general news anchor. It is John Smith of Tacoma. Yep. And I know John, what his hobbies are. I know because he puts it all online. They do.
Yeah. Well, and they want their personalities, on-air personalities, to be relatable and make connections with the community. And in turn, we can use that information to help find, mutual background or interest and bond, which is a great way to build relationships. So
exactly. Yeah.
Bob, unfortunately, we have run out of time, but it's been a pleasure talking to you about, your insights and experience. I'm going to encourage our audience to connect with you on LinkedIn. And we'll put a link to your LinkedIn profile in the episode notes. And for our audience, when you attempt to reach Bob, make sure you indicate that, hey, I heard you on Top of PR. And
I love that.
And that's why I'm connecting with you today, instead of just being lazy and just pushing the connect button and then Bob doesn't know who you are, right? So
take the advice we just gave you.
That's right. Work on building a relationship. That's right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. All right, Bob. Well, thank you very much for being here. With that, this has been another episode of On Top of PR, where we work hard to help you stay on top of PR. If you enjoyed this episode, would you please take a moment to subscribe and or share this episode with a friend? Stay tuned for more episodes, and we appreciate your loyalty and participating as an audience member. If you have a topic or guest you'd like to see us feature, let us know that as well. Be well.
This has been On Top of PR with Jason Mudd, presented by ReviewMaxer. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And and check out past shows at ontopofpr.com.